Welcome to Trust the Process podcast, where we'll pull back the curtain on new home construction, the real estate market, and the trends shaping it all. Discover the stories, insights, and expertise behind the process of building a new home. Join us, and let's build something great together. Welcome back to Trust the Process, the podcast where we talk about new home construction, the real estate market, and everything in between. Today we're going to talk about the topic that's really top of mind for a lot of people right now, and it's dominating national headlines, would be the fires in California. Given that Nevada is so close to California as our border state, how does that influence us? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for our housing market? And some of the things that we may or may not see as this crisis unfolds. So I'm going to hand it off to you. Obviously, we know the tragedy that's happening there, and we can't not see it.
Right,
so many people affected.
Yeah, it's a lot of devastation and a lot of things laid to waste, and a lot of ramifications. I think that we'll feel for years into the future.
I agree.
There are just locally, as a Las Vegas resident, there are a huge neighbor of ours, right? I mean, they're on the order of 25, 30 times the size in terms of population of Nevada. And sometimes I feel like Las Vegas is a suburb of Los Angeles anyway.
So it does sometimes feel like that. And now when they've talked a little bit about the train that's going to go between, there's almost that imagination that it is just
it kind of feels like it, yes. Right? It affects everyone, but I do think it'll have pressure on the entire country. You know, as small ripples. Locally, it'll affect, obviously, Los Angeles in terms of how that looks from a rebuilding standpoint. And that's why we chose to talk about it on this episode, or as part of this podcast, because around 15,000, at the time of filming this, we're in the last week of January 2025. And at the time of filming this, it's estimated that around 15,000 structures were destroyed. The vast majority of those were residential structures, were homes.
Tragic.
Yeah, tragic. So that is a lot of inventory that is now out of the market, a lot of devastation, obviously loss of life and loss of memories and things that it's hard to, seems trite to talk about in this context, but it does matter, and it will affect building policy, and it will affect building practices. It will affect net migration. There will be people who choose not to rebuild, or people that make this their, you know what, this is their line in the sand, and say, I was on the fence, I was going to move in the next 5 years, but I don't want to be the next victim. I don't want to be the next person that's affected by a natural disaster in California.
And it's going to be so expensive to rebuild. It's an expensive loss.
It's an expensive loss in terms of where it is, just geographically. Very challenging to build in a lot of those locales. In the Pacific Palisades, a lot of those slopes and mountainside homes may be cost prohibitive to build and may not even see it pencil out for many, many years. So that kind of loss is really, how do you even calculate it? Where do you even start? Because it wasn't just the structure that was lost. It was everything else that maybe the whole viability of that site is now no longer buildable. Now, what is it worth? A vista? I mean, you buy it to put a picnic table there?
Discussions that because of the location and because some of those obstacles that city, county may not even allow people to rebuild in those same locations.
And
that in itself is a migration question.
That's right. And if you're displaced and you owned that parcel and it was passed down, especially some of the Altadena real estate that was lost, a lot of those homes were handed down. Those aren't affluent people, as in general. A lot of that Eaton fire, the damage caused by the Eaton fire, affected more middle class and even lower middle class people, that their largest asset was their home, and maybe that asset was handed down over the generations, and it's underinsured or not insured, or now going to be in a neighborhood that is completely burned out, including the commercial areas. So who wants to be the first one in? And the businesses certainly don't want to be the first one in. You'll need the rooftops to support the businesses.
Sure. The
people don't want to live where there are no cafes and restaurants and dry cleaners and gas stations and general conveniences of modern life. So who's going to take the investment?
Yeah, those are big thoughts.
Who's going to take the risk, right? And then if you look at it from the eyes of a speculative builder like our company, where is the off ramp? How do you calculate end of day value of a finished product? Let's say you were to pick up 6 or 7 lots, demo the homes, what's left of them, and rebuild with the intent to resell, where's your market? Who's going to take that risk? Are you going to shoulder the risk of not only what does the home look like at the end in terms of market value, but what is the process like in getting there? And what kind of regulation and red tape are you going to have to fight to tear down and to rebuild to make it a commercially viable endeavor? So we have that overlaying it, and then you'll have the individual homeowners who may choose to rebuild. Did they have enough insurance? Is what they owned before even approvable with current zoning and city planning? So those are the kind of clouds that are hanging over the entire process. And when you look at that times, let's say 90% of the structures lost were residential. And if the estimates are accurate at 15,000 and it's not more, let's just take those two assumptions. We're at 13,500 residences. How many of those were four-family homes that, like I mentioned, may be incongruent with current day zoning? Now it's one home, or one home in an accessory dwelling structure. We'll see a net loss of homes. And then now what we're seeing is a push-pull. And I feel that both sides are a little correct, because there's a push to say we have to rebuild, we have to cut all the regulation and red tape. And then there's a push on the other side of the argument that, well, if we just rebuild low-density suburban housing in the same like kind and quality of what was there, what's to stop this from happening again? And that's not just a desirability standpoint or an intellectual argument. It's an insurability argument too. What kind of insurance company is going to want to take a risk? If you look at the actuarial risk of insuring something that's the exact same product that was there before, give or take at 2025 or 2026 year built, but it's still in essence the same product that was there, that in a 1 in 50 year window was annihilated. And everything in an actuarial, I'm not an insurance expert, but everything is about likelihood of an event, a major loss happening in X number of years over the amount of value of that loss. So if a fire is an every 50-year event, that property becomes insurable. They're pretty much having to hit you with a 2% risk. So your property's $1 million. 2% of that, if you have a 1 in 50 year chance of a total loss, just general, there's more that goes into these calculations than that, but in general, that's a $20,000 a year policy because it's a 2% risk of a loss. So when you couple that with other natural disasters and other overlays, and then just an overall appetite for wanting to be in that business, at the end of the day, insurance is a capitalist endeavor. So you're going to have people that want to take that risk. Even if the math is $20,000, maybe the market has policies priced at $40,000, and it just might be an uninsurable, insurmountable hill to climb. And when you look at the affluent areas, that might be okay. The market forces might outweigh that. It'll still hold down their values in the future. But when you look at the more middle class neighborhoods in that market, maybe $1 million homes, probably a middle class, and a lot of Altadena and 1.2, which represents maybe a 1,600 square foot Rambler single story on an eighth of an acre, 5,600 square foot lot. How does that math work out? How do you hit a middle class family with a $20,000 or $30,000 insurance premium plus their mortgage, taxes, and everything else that comes with running a household? So it's those types of considerations that really have a lot of people worried.
It isn't a fair playing field.
It's not a fair playing field.
It's not
Exactly.
a fair playing field. And so there isn't, and like you said, they're not all affluent. So
how does that look?
People even afford to rebuild? I mean, there's a lot of question.
And I think LA is a massive, wealthy city. That land will be reimagined and reused, but it's going to be so challenging to go through that web of problems. Similar to our foreclosure crisis that really hit a lot of the Sun Belt and high growing cities. It took a lot of time. A lot of that land was held in bankruptcy courts or was part of a settlement or part of a company that had since gone bankrupt. So you're driving through these neighborhoods with all these buildable lots and you're thinking there's still a demand for housing and the numbers still pencil in some ways. Why is that not being developed yet? It just has to work its way through the courts and the financial systems, and maybe it's wrapped up in like I mentioned, bankruptcy courts and other kind of barriers and hurdles that we don't even see and aren't overtly obvious. So we're going to see a push-pull.
And in the meantime, where are those people staying?
Exactly. The displaced people
where do they go?
If you figure it's on the order of 50 to 100,000 people, what does that look like to the greater LA market? What does that look like to Las Vegas? There's a lot of op-eds already publishing that it'll 100% have knock-on effects to the Las Vegas, probably rental market maybe. We saw that, and we have another episode on migration. We saw that in COVID. I mean, we saw various states with their different regulations and rules around COVID. That was sometimes just a line in the sand that may have pushed them to a 2021 move to a different state versus what would have been maybe a 2030 move or a 2025 move. It just kind of reshuffled the deck.
And the taxes and the cost of living, all of those things.
A lot of things, right? If they're
30%
if they were
lower cost of living to
probably,
be in Vegas, and if
depending
you're there
on the
and
city,
displaced and confused and not sure what to do next,
or 3 towns over was displaced, but you're fine. What does that look like?
Ooh.
What does that look like for just these kind of bordering cities to LA and bordering states to California? So it'll be really interesting.
It will.
And we'll probably be talking about that. That's why I said these will have long ripples, and it will affect a lot of things. From a regulation standpoint, when you look at what is it going to take to rebuild, when I talked about that push and pull, so you have existing zoning laws, existing land use, existing building codes. That's just what's priced into it now. But will it be politically advantageous to reimagine these things and cause more regulation and have more pushes for barriers, natural fire breaks, more setback laws, stricter setback laws? And when they talk about it from an intellectual standpoint, it's easy to say, but in a country with private property, who's to determine, oh, your street is now a boundary zone, so we're not going to allow development on your street. How politically popular is that?
Eminent domain, they come in and they just start
right? Is that what it looks like?
I don't know.
I mean, when you think about
it would have to be, because there are people who wouldn't want that or wouldn't be willing to give up what they do have.
Exactly. That they could come in eminent domain. Now that is a very long, drawn-out process that has appeals, may even go to the state Supreme Courts, may be appealed higher than that. So it's just very tricky because you're going to have an intellectual argument that's probably not
and that's
wrong.
Sound on both sides.
Right? They are.
Yes.
You could steel man either side of it.
Yes.
And I think that it's going to be interesting to watch the push-pull. Right now, it's easy to get action because the city is literally still smoldering. At the time we recorded this last week of January, 68% contained. It's a little over half contained. It's still a very active and unfolding situation.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? How does that ripple through? So right now it's very politically popular to talk about, Newsom has an executive order that said the Coastal Commission, he basically defanged the California Coastal Commission. So the California Coastal Commission could be its own episode.
Okay, I don't know what that is.
So what it was sworn in the mid-70s, sworn into law. And it essentially regulates the coastal zone. It's 1,100 miles of California's coastal zone, pretty much the entire border where it hits the Pacific Ocean. And it only pertains to development, access to the beach, and overall preservation of the coast. So it dictates the entirety of the coastline, but it can go as short as 3,000 feet in from the coast and as far as 3 miles inland, depending on where you're at.
Wow.
They have full veto-proof authority to transcend city planners, actions taken by local elected government officials, and the ability to fine private citizens. So effectively what it does is grants one governing body that was originally voted in the 70s. It allows them pretty much full executive authority of the entire coastline. And like I mentioned, as short as 3,000 feet and as big as 3 or 4 miles in coastal. So when you think about the kind of reach, think about how far 4 miles from the beach would feel. Right? You're going to, we're not anywhere. I mean, maybe we're a beach town, but we're not a beachfront property. We're 4 miles in.
And 4 miles in, when you think people are building right up to the beach, there's
that's a lot of jurisdiction.
Exactly.
And it's, by the way, it is even more than residential. So it also dictates
and commercial, true.
Commercial, but it also dictates room rates and how they want a diversity of room rates along California's coastal hotels and hospitality industry. In fact, one hotel operator was fined $15.5 million for converting his hotel to a boutique high-end luxury hotel without their approval, and operated it for several years, never asked for their permission, and was slapped with a very, very heavy fine for that. So you can see the far-reaching power and authority that they have.
Talks about that regulation,
regulatory. I think a lot of what it is that, yes, it encompasses a large land area, but how many citizens does it truly affect? And you've got a lot of these little anecdotes and these stories, which I went down the rabbit hole and read, and some of them are absolutely atrocious. I feel that when it's affecting on the order of 100 people, 20 people, one developer, one hotel owner, it's just not a popular story. It doesn't get brought up. So now with the wildfires, though, when we're talking 30 to 50,000 citizens displaced, I think it was smart of Newsom to say, we're going to defang this for a little bit, temporarily. Let's get this place rebuilt, because they have full authority. Let's say you're in one of their zones, you're 2 miles in from the coast, and you want to pull a permit to build a single-family home. They have full authority to stop it.
Wow.
And their default, generally, if you talk to my architect, does a lot of work over there. If you talk to them, their default answer is almost always no. And then because it's considered an environmental agency, it allows for public comment. So if you're converting a rundown fourplex into a 5/100 unit apartment building, every neighbor in there is going to have public comment and the ability to basically petition the California Coastal Commission to stop the project. And the appeals process alone takes about 9 to 11 months, just the appeals process, if you're told no. And many times it's completely overridden. Really good example were 2 condos in Orange County, condo complexes on the water. They needed a breakwater built. One condo was to save the development. One condo was built in 1974, which predated the California Coastal Commission, and the guidelines in the California Coastal Commission say they may approve structures that will prevent the demolition or the loss of existing structures. So the Coastal Commission had another application for a condo complex built in 1984. They're about 500 feet from each other. They approved the one built in 74 and denied the one in 84, leaving that condo complex completely vulnerable to erosion, to loss from weather, just general coastal concerns. And their argument was, well, you existed after the California Coastal Commission. You can see the level of fury and ire that commission draws from local residents and developers. And it's funny to read the stories of the local jurisdictions like City of Newport Beach coming in to direct opposition to the California Coastal Commission. For instance, they sold a parcel of their wharf to a developer for several $100 million, which really helped the city. And the California Coastal Commission blocked it, saying that you're going to cause undue strain onto the local streets and traffic, and people aren't going to be able to park and access the beach appropriately. Another great story, and I won't fill the podcast with anecdotes, but there was a single family home owner that wanted to build an accessory dwelling unit for his disabled daughter to live in after he passed. And they opposed it because the pathway he was going to plan for, fund, and execute to preserve beach access that was previously through his property, they said that it wasn't as good of a view for hikers when you rerouted it 40 feet to the east.
Wow.
So they denied his entire accessory dwelling unit, even though his local jurisdiction and building department had approved it.
So they have a lot of
They have a lot of power.
And it's an entity that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah.
And I guess that's because Nevada doesn't have a coast.
We don't have a coast,
so we
right.
don't deal with that municipality. But
that's right.
That's interesting.
And as mentioned, how many people does it truly affect? Wow. Not enough to make headlines, but now it will.
No, but it will for sure.
Will.
So yes.
So imagine pretty much every home in the Palisades would fall into this. I doubt Altadena is probably far inland enough to not deal with the Coastal Commission, but that's just one of many commissions that you might have to deal with to get your projects approved. But you can see just those little anecdotes of
and those are just
layers
a
of
couple little
regulation.
stories. Every single home, every single dwelling,
Every
every single
single
hotel,
home.
every restaurant,
It's
everything
everything.
has that story or a
That's
similar
right.
story that they're going to battle.
That they will. All right. And the last count in the Palisades alone was about 6,500 structures. So there are 6,500 potential anecdotes. Now, like I mentioned, those have been temporarily defanged. So we'll see. But that's popular to say and do. But how is it going to look where the rubber meets the road when the headlines in 6 months move on to some other calamity or move on to something else? What will that look like? Will it come back? Will the Coastal Commission and its, I think, 200 employees and $48 million budget on the scale of the state of California is nothing, but yields so much power? Are they going to fight for their survival? Because you see something like this, could this be the end of that commission? Could we see it realize, wait, this commission has no popular support? And plenty of coastal states and towns manage their coastlines completely fine without some state-appointed regulatory body. So what I found interesting was their ability to veto state and local building departments and state and local municipalities, or I should say local municipalities. Really interesting. Non-elected, not a single person is elected in that office.
And before we even get to the building part, so the regulatory build portion of it, what do you think that land value will be at the end of all of this? Is it going to be parcel to parcel, or will it overall bear some decrease? Or
I can't see how it for sure lost desirability
Sure.
when the entire town is lost. LA Metro is such a huge animal that could it easily be absorbed? Absolutely. Barring notwithstanding any of the personal loss and personal property loss, that is objectively prime real estate. Now it has its own headwinds, the insurance piece of it,
but it's desirable in those
when you're in a city that
and
large.
the people that want to be there,
Right.
were there by choice.
Exactly.
It wasn't an accidental land.
Right.
That was
Right.
their desired location.
And we'll talk about this in our migration episode, but California is still one of the top 5 states for attracting new residents. It's not growing net because it's losing people as fast as it's bringing them in, but it is, don't let the headlines fool you, it is a dynamic economic powerhouse that pulls in a lot of people. So you're in a growing state. You're in an established metroplex of, I think 13 or 14 million. We'll put a correction if it's more than that. It's a lot. If you count the metro area, if you run into the Inland Empire and you kind of, how far can you drive without seeing desert? If you count that, the boundary, depending, I'm sure the metropolitan statistical area by the census is one number.
That's an interesting thought.
But you look at a place like that, and what a drop in the bucket 12,000 homes is. It'll be nothing to find the demand. But I think, what is it going to look like, and how is it going to collide with private property? How are you going to get the 50 residents on this block to all sell at the same time, to all have the same
fire
vision?
went around this house,
Right.
and burned.
Right.
They only had nominal damage, whereas
Right.
one next door
That's
is
right.
completely desecrated. So it's not.
It's piecemeal.
It's not a level playing field.
That's right.
So,
It's not 150 acres in the desert, which we have the benefit and the beauty in these growing Sunbelt cities.
we do.
We have that kind of cohesive nature to say, okay, this is a big tract of land, and we can kind of reimagine it any way we want.
Which I guess that brings me to the next thought was, do they come here? I mean, there are a lot of good reasons that they might consider. So what does that do to the influx here?
Oh, I think we'll definitely see it. Macro data, I don't know if even 50,000 people, and we'll talk about that in our migration episode, how many come to Nevada, how many come to purchase, how many come to rent, how many live with family and stay in California. What does that really look like? When you look at the total numbers of people that moved to Nevada on the order of 360,000 over 4 years, it's not a ton. Then even assuming every single one of those people that are displaced come to Nevada, I think it'll probably ripple out, and we'll slowly kind of incrementally feel it.
And like you said, it's not going to be immediate.
No.
Because insurance
People
claims
have a lot to sort through there.
Yes.
So I think that we're also used to a lot of inbound migration from there anyway. So we might not even really feel it because we're used to sealing. I just feel that the numbers are so massive of what we're already seeing. I don't know that it'll have a dramatic increase we're already a tight real estate market. We're already an appreciating real estate market. We're already a tight city. We're already seeing a lot of inbound migration and growth. Are those numbers going to really bear it out? How many of those people moved to Austin, Texas? How many moved to just an inland city in California? Mm-hmm. How many people moved to Seattle? And so there's Arizona.
And even further. I mean, I know the Carolinas are growing.
Exactly.
You know, I mean,
so I think it's a scale that's unimaginable if you try to put 50,000 people into an arena. But when you spread it out over 6 or 7 states that would be candidates for moves and relocations, I think that we might not really feel it. But it'll be interesting. And when you look at what does it do to building industry, when you have that, it's not a growing city. It's not used to that base of labor that we're used to in these Sunbelt cities that are growing, the Phoenixes and the Las Vegas and the Charlotte. They have a labor pool. We have an existing labor pool. So we might feel that first before we feel anything else.
Sure.
But I think they will struggle without having the housing stock for that labor force. What kind of premiums will you have to pay to get the labor force out there to start rebuilding?
Right.
Will the regulation be a blessing in disguise because it will throttle down redevelopment and will throttle down the rebuilding process to where it is somewhat manageable? Imagine trying to rebuild 15,000 structures in a 12-month period. We built, what did we say, around 12,000 homes last year in Las Vegas, in addition to all the other development and growth that might happen in a city that large. Redevelopment, things, tear down, stuff like that.
And a sparse labor force nationwide too. So now are there people from Vegas that go there to build and to work?
That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah,
kind of what you call a brain drain, but also a labor drain. Where Bureau of Labor Statistics already estimates we're about 200,000 to 400,000 construction labor type workers short over the next so many years, 3 to 5 years.
Feel that. We feel
I
that.
definitely feel it. I definitely feel it. Yeah, it is going to be a challenge. And then what does it do for inflationary pressures on building materials and just logistics of all of those things that are going to come into play? And I think the biggest factor that people are glazing over is something that you brought up of what is the overall desirability of that now? And how do we have price discovery? And that's one of my favorite terms, right? Where's the price discovery? We've never had essentially an entire city. If you look at Altadena or Palisades, we've never had an entire city burnout. That's part of a larger major metropolitan area. Where's the price discovery on what are those parcels worth? What are the homes worth when they're done? Where's the desirability? Because you could make an argument that you could see luxury homes built on every single one of those $2, $3, $4 million homes. Luxury homes by most standards. Is there the demand there? The geographics support it. A lot to consider. Obviously, it's an unfolding situation,
it's the unknowns in it are really unsettling. It's
very.
I mean, and it's not even. I mean, it's our neighbor. It isn't even our backyard here in the Las Vegas Valley. But because they're our neighbor, it's you feel for them and you want to understand what they're going to go through and be somehow empathetic to
somehow,
the situation.
and maybe help in some way. And not that you are watching it like a cinema movie, but it's something that is interesting to watch. What it's going to look like as this unfolds.
Yeah, and hard to envision. I just can't comprehend how, wildfires used to be. Wildfires just happened in the forest.
In the wilderness.
Yes, and now they're ravaging straight through towns.
Right.
And it isn't something that used to happen. I didn't hear about it years ago, and now suddenly this has become a thing. Is it the way that we're building? Is it the way that we're living? Is it the products that we're using, or is there some other ecosystem happening that's allowing for these fires to take place? The one in Maui and the one. I mean, there just have been a series of those situations in recent years. Is
it a numbers game? Is it that those areas that are fire prone didn't have the development, and on the scale of geological time, 50 years is a blink of an eye. So if you were to look at it on a scale of 1,000 years, and you'd say those homes popped up and then there was literally a fire, how could they not have seen that happen?
Right, if you're looking at it
on that scale of time. So I think there's a lot of things that come into play, weather patterns and climate change. I think that are affecting droughts. Droughts are longer, harder, more intense. So I think that has a play in it. And I think I don't want to pontificate, but I definitely think that there was probably some mismanagement in terms of brush control. And if you see the kind of way it was managed. It is kind of interesting
There has
that
been a
it
lot of
didn't
discussion.
happen sooner, that there was not some sort of fire sooner. You have all of those people there. I mean,
And
there's
funding of the fire department and some of the
Exactly,
layouts
right,
and
right.
those things too that obviously are all topics of
Kind of-
discussion out in the news world.
Yeah.
But for us to kind of bring it back home and think about how that affects us,
right.
and just the national housing market as a whole,
Right,
what it could
right.
potentially mean.
And something that we talked about in our other episode about headwinds and things kind of affecting the market that I regret not bringing up was the insurance crisis. And if you look at what it's doing to premiums in many states, Florida, North Carolina, any hurricane-prone state, any seismic-prone state, wildfire-prone state, that could be an upcoming crisis that is not even on our radar. When you think about the actuarial math that goes into, is this a 1 in 1,000 year event, 1 in 50 year event, 1 in 500 year event, turns the math from a $20,000 premium a year to a $2,000 premium a year.
And
So-
categorically, maybe it isn't always a fire, like you're saying. Maybe it's the earthquake, maybe it's a
Right.
flood, maybe it's a mudslide.
That's
I mean,
right.
there are so many other natural disasters that happen
That's right.
nationally, that we're not affected by here in
Right.
Vegas, but
And we're
because
very
we
lucky
have
with that.
our weather conditions, we don't have hurricanes. and
We don't have hurricanes.
So
We don't have
we're grateful
mudslides.
for some
Right.
of that. We do have the heat.
We have the heat. We don't have enough vegetation for fires, so
Right.
that's something. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds.
Yeah, it
Future
will be
episodes.
an ongoing, but it felt relevant to discuss it now as it's happening, where we sit here, safe and cozy. There are people who've been displaced and who are suffering from this, and so to look at that and think about that and how that's affecting not just them specifically, but how the ripple effect, as Michael mentioned, will carry out through both the Las Vegas Valley and nationally. So it will be interesting to watch, and we thought it was worth bringing up. And I appreciate your take on it. And
Yeah.
kind of that, the entities that are making some decisions and
We'll
how
have
it'll
to-
go from here. So it will remain to be seen.
It remains to be seen. I'll look forward to checking back in when it's no longer dominating the headlines. To say how did that work out? Did the Coastal Commission remain defanged? Did they speed up permitting?
It'll be interesting to
Yeah.
watch. So, well, we'll keep watching it with you and give you updates as time goes if there is anything that we're noticing in the numbers here in the Las Vegas Valley or otherwise. So thank you for joining us on this episode of Trust the Process, and we will look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning into the Trust the Process podcast. Make sure to follow us on Spotify to stay in the loop with the latest insights, project updates, and everything in between. See you next time.